So, welcome to Learning Plan 4, the autonomic nervous system. This is the system that runs our bodies, and there are a lot of medications that affect this. We're going to be talking about this system and these drugs. Now, to do this, we have to go back a little bit to anatomy and physiology, and we're going to cover exactly what the autonomic nervous system is composed of, all the different parts of it, because every drug affects a different aspect of it. So we have to make sure we understand what's going on. Okay, so this is going to go beyond just simple pharmacology, which remember is a study of drugs. This is going to encompass the medications and the actual body systems. So the central nervous system, CNS, right? CNS. The central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. And we talked about that just recently. Remember, rocephin is able to cross the blood-brain barrier. So a person who has meningitis, for example, would be treated with rocephin because it enters the central nervous system. So that's the big part, the brain and the spine, the spinal cord, not just the spine. Then we have the peripheral nervous system. You have to have that because that gets out to the fingertips, right? So we have the peripheral nervous system. And with the peripheral nervous system, we have two more kinds of systems. So we have the autonomic nervous system, and the somatic. The autonomic is totally involuntary. That is what runs our body. So autonomic is involuntary. Heartbeat, breathing, peristalsis in the gut. Those are all autonomic functions. Peristalsis begins when you put food in there, so it sends a signal to the brain and then it starts the whole digestive process. We don't think about every heartbeat. We don't necessarily think about every breath. Those are autonomic functions. Somatic is voluntary. This is a somatic function. Making a fist, moving your hand, walking. Those are all somatic functions. They are under our control. Why do you suppose it's important to understand the difference between autonomic and somatic? Well, if you are taking a medication that is going to depress everything, if it's going to depress voluntary function, that's fine. But if it also affects the autonomic system, think of the complications to that. It's going to slow your respiratory rate, could slow your heart rate. It's going to affect a lot of those functions that are necessary for life. Now within the autonomic system there's two more. I can't spell today. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic. I'm not going to be doing a lot of writing on the board. I just wanted to get those words up there. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic are two aspects, and you couldn't see that, so we'll move the camera there. So now you can see what I wrote. See that beautiful writing? Sorry about that. So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system act on different parts of the body, and those are very important also because, again, we want to affect one or the other, not necessarily all of it. So what am I talking about? What are all these different nervous systems? I thought it was just all nerves and brains, right? There's so much more. You know, the autonomic nervous system targets organs, eyes and lungs and heart, blood vessels. You know you have nerves that affect blood vessels, right? They expand and they contract sometimes, constrict, dilate. Bladder, metabolism, the GI system, the uterus, the kidney, all of those are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. I mean, those of you out there in this room, or this online system, if you've had a child, you didn't think about having your uterine contractions. Your body did that on its own, right? So those are all things that are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, there are neurotransmitters that affect the autonomic nervous system, or the ANS, right? There's two subdivisions that let me rephrase that. Each of the major subdivisions is a two-neuron system. The first is the neuron that starts in the central nervous system of the brain, or the spinal cord, and it ends in a cluster of nerve cell bodies, and this is called the ganglion, and that's outside the CNS. That is in the peripheral nervous system. The second is called the postganglionic neuron, and that starts at the ganglion and ends at the tissue upon which it acts. So I guess I'm going to do a little bit more drawing here. Let's see if I can draw a nice picture of this. Remember, I'm a nurse and teacher, not an artist. We have the brain, spinal cord. Right here, let's say right there we have a nerve, a neuron, that, and this is that's the heart. Okay, so this neuron leaves the spinal cord and goes to, let's say, a group of ganglions right there. Then we have the postganglion neuron, which goes to the heart. I hope that made sense. I hope. So the first part of the neuron system connects with the brain or the spinal column, the spinal cord. Wow, it's almost like it's a Monday today and it's Friday. And it ends in a cluster of nerve cell bodies. That's the ganglion. And it's just a cluster of cells. And then there's a neuron that leaves the ganglion called the postganglionic neuron, and that ends on the tissue, in this case, the heart. Now this is very different from the motor or somatic nervous system. Because in the motor system, or the somatic, remember this is the voluntary system, that is a single neuron that goes from the spinal cord to whatever muscle is being innervated. So this is, again, in the autonomic nervous system, there are two neurons. There's one that goes here to the ganglion, which is a cluster of nerve cells, and then one that goes from the ganglion to the heart to give you a heartbeat. That's autonomic. If you're going to go walking, there's a neuron that starts in your spine, and it goes down your back to your leg. One neuron. Two neurons, one neuron. Why is that important? Why do you suppose it's important to understand that there's a two-part system for that autonomic nervous system? Well, we're going to get to that. Now, you need a neurotransmitter. That's a chemical substance, and that is what actually tells the neurons to send messages. We all know that, but we're going to cover it again. And there are two neurotransmitters, norepinephrine and acetylcholine. Norepinephrine, acetylcholine. Really important drugs. And they are drugs. They're neurotransmitters that have been turned into drugs also. And in this diagram, you see of exactly how the neurotransmitters move down the nerve fiber. And I'm not going to describe this verbally. You can look at it visually, but this shows the pathway of neurotransmitters. So the autonomic nervous system is a complex system. Remember, we have sympathetic and parasympathetic, which I already raised. When you have something that stimulates the nervous system, it reduces the parasympathetic nervous system. If it stimulates the parasympathetic, it inhibits the sympathetic. You won't have a stimulation of both systems by the same chemical, or the same system, or trigger, let's call it that. One trigger will not stimulate both autonomic nervous systems. It's one or the other. And if one goes up, the other goes down. And again, this is going to be some important information because we're going to talk about side effects, complications, and what to watch for. So when you're taking an agonist, what's an agonist? Remember? Something that causes an effect. If you're taking an agonist and it affects the sympathetic nervous system, that is the fight or flight syndrome. That causes you to get revved up. It's going to stimulate body processes that promote self-preservation. So what are some things it might be doing? Well, it's going to maybe increase your breathing, right? To get more oxygen in. It's going to increase your strength a little bit so that if you have to run, you can. It's going to promote possibly aggression. It's certainly going to raise your heart rate and bring on some anxiety. That's the sympathetic nervous system being fired up. So you go into an exam. You're going to take an exam in any class and you're nervous. And you sit down and you start feeling really nervous and you just had breakfast and now it's kind of feeling in your stomach because you're all nervous and you're breathing a little bit harder, maybe you're sweating a little bit. That's your sympathetic nervous system being fired up. You were in that fight or flight mode. Now, a parasympathetic system, this would be a cholinergic medication or chemical. This is the rest and digest system. So this causes you to conserve energy. It pulls the energy from your muscles and relaxes it. It's the exact opposite, of course, than the sympathetic. The sympathetic is an adrenergic. Let me write that down with a marker. Adrenergic and cholinergic. So the adrenergic causes a fight or flight reaction in the body, whereas the cholinergic is the rest and digest. So now remember, when one goes up, the other goes down. It's always the way it works. So let's think about the implications of that. Adrenergic. Think of adrenergic. Adrenaline. Adrenergic is like adrenaline. In fact, adrenaline is an adrenergic drug. If you are in a situation where you are worked up and getting ready to fight or flight, and you have that adrenaline pumping through your system, what's happening in your stomach? It's not digesting the food anymore. All that energy that would go to your stomach is going everywhere else to protect you, right? So your sympathetic system goes up, your parasympathetic system goes down, you feel maybe nauseated because the food in your stomach is just sitting there. Let's look at the other thing. Let's imagine Thanksgiving dinner. I don't know about at your place, but Thanksgiving dinner at my house, it's a big deal. I love that meal. It's my favorite meal of the entire year. So we have a big meal. You have a pile of turkey, and you have all that stuffing and gravy and potatoes and pecan pie and everything, right? And then afterwards, you sit down in a chair and you fall asleep. No, it's not the tryptophan in the turkey. You get more tryptophan in other foods than you do in turkey. It's just what people think. What's happening is it is stimulating your parasympathetic system. All that food is telling your stomach, and your stomach is saying, oh, we got to get working. We got to work really hard because we have to digest all this food. So it stimulates the parasympathetic system. It reduces the sympathetic, pulls the energy from your voluntary muscles, from your lung muscles, and triggers and lets it go into your gut to digest food. That's why you get tired after a big meal, because your body can't do everything at once. Your body is not a good multitasker. It's either walking or it's digesting. Can't really do both. And if you try to do both, you do neither one very well. So, bottom line, sympathetic is fight or flight. It stimulates body processes to promote self-preservation. Parasympathetic, rest and digest. And this results in conserving energy. And you look at the animals, animal kingdom. After eating a food, what do most animals do? They sit down. They lay down. They're letting their body digest what they ate. So that is the agonists for the two different systems. Now, there are some adrenergic. Wow, I'm having a hard time saying these words. The sympathetic adrenergic medications and the parasympathetic or cholinergic are different, and they target different receptor cells. So the adrenergic, the adrenaline, and actually adrenaline is a more the true term for adrenaline is called epinephrine. And then there's norepinephrine. Epinephrine. Those are the two sympathetic adrenergic neurotransmitters. Our bodies make them, but they can also be given as an injection. And these target alpha 1 and alpha 2, and beta 1, beta 2. Alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2. Cholinergic, or neurotransmitters that are cholinergic, are acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. Notice that? Acetylcholine is a cholinergic. Remember that. Acetylcholine is a cholinergic. The epinephrines are also forms of adrenaline, and adrenaline, remember that, okay? Epinephrines, adrenergic, acetylcholine, cholinergic. This targets is the nicotinic and the muscarinic. Muscarinic. So, all right, let's talk about this in a little greater detail now that I'm done writing on the board. The sympathetic nervous system is called the adrenergic system because it's believed that the adrenaline was the neurotransmitter that innervates the smooth muscles. However, that one is actually the norepinephrine. Adrenergic drugs mimic the effects of norepinephrine. Because they initiate a response at those adrenergic receptor sites, they're also called adrenergic agonists. And remember, anything that's an agonist is something that causes a reaction, right? Drugs that block the effects of norepinephrine, they're called adrenergic blockers, or what's the other word? Adrenergic antagonists, because they prevent a response. So what do you suppose an adrenergic antagonist would have? What action would it have on the heart rate? It's going to slow it down, right? Because an adrenergic agonist would raise the heart rate. So there's alpha adrenergic and beta adrenergic. And I'm just going to say alpha and beta from this point forward because I'm getting my tongue twisted around. Alpha 1 is in the smooth muscles of the blood vessels, the sphincters of the urinary bladder. So that's alpha 1. Blood vessels and the sphincter of the urinary bladder. Alpha 2, it's at the presynaptic neuron And this controls the release of neurotransmitters. So think about that. If you take a medication that affects the alpha receptors, it's going to affect the blood vessels and the sphincter of the urinary bladder. It's also going to control the neurotransmitter release. So if it's an agonist, what's it going to do to that neurotransmitter? It's going to cause it to fire off. Now the beta 1 and beta 2, these are important because each one is in a different part of the body. Beta 1 is the heart. So it's mostly in the heart and fatty tissue. It increases the heart rate and the force of contraction. So beta 1, increased heart rate and force of contraction, you get a good pumping heart.
Are you going to be out here long? Or you
No.
have this reserved for 10 to 12?
I'll be out.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be out in 5 minutes. Sorry about that. Let me finish this last slide here. Beta 2, the lungs. It affects the bronchial dilation of the lungs. So a beta blocker in the heart, for the heart, would decrease heart rate and decrease contraction. A beta 2 would affect bronchodilation. So the parasympathetic nervous system, it's called the cholinergic system. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Cholinergic drugs mimic acetylcholine. And of course, drugs that block acetylcholine are anticholinergic or cholinergic agonists because they inhibit the effect of acetylcholine. Come back for part B. Let's call it part B, okay? I'll be back in just a minute.